So, after we did that an hour ago, we thought, oh wait, there's this, and that, and this, and that, and this, and that, and this, and that, and
What he said.
then. Anyways, some other points that we wanted to make. One thing, another good example of what we're talking about in terms of the whole action and kind of with comedy being more important than the action would be Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Really, the thing that we're talking about is, in a nutshell, that shows like in the earlier 2000s were a lot more action with comedic elements. But nowadays, the bigger thing is comedies with action elements.
Generally.
Like, like we said, like Steven Universe and Adventure Time, they're comedies, but they have action in them. Or Teen Titans Go or Ultimate Spider-Man. They're based on actual superhero action properties, but they're more so comedic.
Yeah. Though I'd say Ultimate Spider-Man is a bit close to being an action show than Teen Titans Go is, but
It's still predominantly a comedy,
yeah.
and it's also predominantly a children's comedy.
Yes. Although it is handy to find out what the characters are.
True. But yeah, we just wanted to go at that point.
Pretty much, yeah.
Also, what about any other examples of action shows in like terms of Marvel? Because we were mostly talking about DC, which is partially why I mentioned Ultimate Spider-Man.
Uh, well, there's also other Marvel shows on there right now, but they're pretty much in the same kind of universe as Ultimate Spider-Man, so there's really not much to elaborate on. But
Like Hulk and the Agents of Smash, and
yeah, and Avengers Assemble, which was put on in favor, which was put on in favor of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which was more the traditional action show.
yeah, Earth's Mightiest Heroes is a pretty good actiony action show, but
Yeah,
then now we have Avengers Assemble.
yeah. Same goes for Ultimate and Spectacular, except for Spectacular, it was kind of out of everyone's control. Like, basically, Disney got the TV rights to Spider-Man again, and in order to, like, continue Spectacular, they'd have to, like, buy all the intellectual property rights from Sony, and they didn't really want to bother doing that. So, I mean, it's just cheaper to make a new show, so that's what they did.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Although Young Justice was just plain because they can sell toys.
Yeah.
And they finished the first season on such a
Dark Side.
God damn it, Greg Wiseman. You damn wise guy.
He is a wise man.
But like, oh, and another example would be Ben 10.
Yeah.
So fighting. Ben 10 has always been pretty. It's always been a kid-friendly action show, but a lot of people like complain that the later seasons, while they tried to look more mature, they really weren't.
The latest one doesn't really look all that mature.
Exactly. But like they tried to make it seem as if they're more mature because of the fact that everybody's older, it's more complicated.
Like Alien Force?
Yeah. Alien Force and then um,
Something else.
I think it's Ultimate Alien.
Yeah.
They're basically the same show, just but well Ben 10, the original show, I think it was really good, personally.
I
I
see.
actually quite liked it. But it was a bit more, even though it was very kid friendly, it's managed to keep itself at least to somewhat of maturity.
And the same people who made Ben 10 are making all the Marvel shows right now.
Hmm. Man of
So it
Action.
ties in.
Yeah. Man of Action kind of has this sort of weird thing that he's kind of doing these. He's kind of a part of this problem.
Well, it's a group of people, but yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are were writers for Marvel, and you can tell in the shows that they're fans of the source material, but it's just they're writing to
They're not very.
kids, so
Yeah, they're not very serious.
yeah.
But yeah,
And oh yeah, weren't we gonna like talk a little about like some of the action cartoon movies lately?
oh yeah, that was a good point. Um, well, the obvious example would be the new show, the movie that's going to come out is Big Hero 6. But also, you could argue like a lot more movies have had more action elements in them.
Yeah.
Like for example, in more recent years, anyways, How to Train Your Dragon or
Uh,
Kung Fu Panda.
and also like Wreck-It Ralph and the Lego Movie and so on.
They're still comedies, and they're still primarily comedies, but they're more actiony than a lot has been lately.
Yeah. Generally.
Although actually, like there were a lot. I feel like there were a lot more animated action movies in like earlier years, like in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah. They're,
Like
they're starting
obviously,
to come back in style a bit lately.
to an extent, I
Yeah.
suppose. But I mean, like there were more serious
Right.
action stuff in the 80s and 90s. But like, damn, I forgot what I was gonna say.
What were you gonna say?
I can't remember.
Batman is awesome?
Oh yeah, yeah. I feel like a lot of the reason why, at least in terms of movies, anyways, is that there are tons and tons and tons of more live action movies that children watch.
Yeah.
There's tons of more superhero movies, and a lot more of them are at least somewhat available for kids, which does explain a lot more of that kind of the reason.
Most of them are rated PG-13, but kids go see them anyway.
Exactly. They're the most of the merchandise nowadays. Stuff from like the Avengers, the movie.
Yeah, like the Marvel movies have like really affected all the other related media.
Exactly. Because a lot of it, most of stuff is for the Dark Knight rather than for the Batman show. You see what I mean? Like a lot, like most merchandising and most action stuff that kids watch are the movies, the live action movies, rather than the shows that are tied into them.
Right.
Whether or not they're particularly appropriate for the kids, it's besides the point. So that may also be a factor as to why there haven't been as many action shows, because in terms of merchandising anyways, which is a lot of the reason for making an action show, there's more so in terms of the movies rather than the show.
Yes.
Which is a lot more, like a lot of the reasons why a lot of shows in the 80s especially were made were because of the fact that the kids were not old enough to watch the movies, or the movies didn't have as much merchandise.
Yeah. Like RoboCop, hardcore rated R action film, but marketed towards kids.
Exactly. That's why they had a RoboCop show.
Yep.
Or I was thinking of another example would have been Rambo. Rambo.
Oh yeah, Rambo. Oh boy, Rambo. The cartoon was pretty much a G.I. Joe clone.
But like that's my point. Like those were a lot more common in those days.
Yeah. You wouldn't really see that happening now unless it was like a parody or something.
And like especially in terms of, actually once I think about it, I feel like also a lot of the reason why it's because of the specific popularity of Marvel over DC, because again, we're talking specifically about comic action shows at this point, but like a lot of action shows coincide with movies.
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show came out a little bit before the movie was announced.
Yeah.
Or the fact that there was a Transformers movie nearby when they made a Transformers show. Or
This is true.
and like nowadays it is, especially ever since The Dark Knight kind of finished, a lot more Batman shows have not been about The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
The Batman was kind of specifically based on the Dark Knight trilogy to an extent. Mostly Batman Begins, but
Kinda, yeah.
that was a partially the reason why they released it. Like the same reason why Batman the Animated Series was made. It was partially to coincide with the Tim Burton Batman movies. That's why Penguin looks the way he does. And
Yeah. And Joker is pretty much the same backstory,
exactly.
even though he's more similar to the comic book version. But
And even so, even uh, with Batman the animated series, it kind of went the other direction in terms of Mr. Freeze.
uh, yeah, it pretty much created the modern Mister Freeze.
But like, it's very,
Very young.
like I said, DC animated shows are usually much better than Marvel animated shows. But at the same time, Marvel movies are much more popular and generally better than DC movies.
And I think a part of that is because DC is usually too afraid to put out anything other than Batman or Superman, and when they don't, it kind of sucks. And while Marvel will usually put out anything, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is coming out in a few weeks, and Marvel's films usually don't take themselves so seriously.
And yet at the same time, DC, in terms of DC cartoons and Marvel cartoons, they kind of do the opposite, where Marvel doesn't really do much other than the Avengers, X-Men, and Spider-Man, and if they try to do something else, it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
While DC, they're gonna have like friggin' some random character that nobody's ever heard of, like Plastic Man, and just be like, oh yeah, this is a totally perfectly fine character.
Of course.
They're not gonna get his own show, but they're still gonna like feature him perfectly fine.
It's so weird how it's like a complete reversal.
Also, the other thing is that um, in terms of Marvel movies are made by Marvel.
Yeah. Well, DC's movies are mainly go through Warner Brothers rather than DC.
And while DC cartoons aren't directly made by DC, they're made by a lot of people who work with DC, like Paul Dini and Bruce Timm.
Yeah. Yeah, they usually
Paul
get a lot
Dini's,
of comic book writers and stuff to work for it.
exactly. So it's pretty much the exact opposite. But the thing is that with Marvel's more popular in terms of the movie market right now. And because of that, the show market is more popular. That's why the Marvel shows are being more popular. There's a lot more Marvel shows right now. That and also because they're owned by DC and they're owned by Disney.
Yeah.
Right now, and that also doesn't hurt.
Pretty much. It's not like Disney will be losing much money if it doesn't do well.
But, I mean, they're also putting them on their auxiliary channels like Disney XD and such.
Yeah. Like, if it doesn't do well, they'll just be like, oh well, we'll just try again.
But like with DC, they tried with DC Nation, but they just kind of like,
we'll just have Teen Titans go.
And that was pretty much it. That's the problem right there. So yeah, we solved our own problem. At least in terms of comics. That explains somewhat.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've talked enough.
We probably have.
So remember, Batman.
I'm also Batman.
Batman.
Justice!